Welcome back to the weight room. We have another great podcast with special guest Samuel Spinelli. It's going to be a great conversation, a lot of knowledge, a lot of experience, so stay tuned. And while you're at it, just go ahead and hit that subscribe button and enjoy the podcast. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think somebody like you with just so much experience, so much knowledge is such a benefit to, so many people out there.
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
I think it's really interesting the perspective that, you would have on both sides of the spectrum.
There's not a lot of people that have done both sides. I would totally agree. There's been a few people that have been like predecessors to me, but most of the time they're just much more heavy in one side of the things, whereas I'm extremely split between them.
Which would you say you kind of focus more on, rehab or strength conditioning?
Currently, I'm probably more versed towards the rehab side of things. It's still quite split between them, where I'm a bit of a workaholic, where I probably put in still like 80 plus hours a week, and in any given week I'm probably doing 40 plus hours of rehab related work, whereas on the other side of the things I'm probably more in the 20 to 30 hours a week on strength and conditioning side of stuff. So it's definitely in favor of rehab. Right now I'm in a transition where I will probably pick up more strength and conditioning work in the next year, just because of some changes from my in-person settings. And I'm pretty excited for that personally. I miss really being in the nitty-gritty side of things for strength and conditioning. I was a lot more on that side years ago, and then I've gradually progressed to being on the rehab side of the spectrum to a higher degree. And just looking forward to get back to really coaching some athletes. I was in high school, started to get involved in a class that was called Health and Fitness that got me introduced to the gym, started to really enjoy it. And then at the same time, I was doing this thing that's offered in Canada called the Registered Apprentice Program, where I actually didn't go to a school in the formal way for half the year, and instead I went and worked in the trades. So I actually was a pipe fitter where I worked on an oil rig and would spend my days doing oil rig work, and then I would then go to school for the other half of the year. And over time, I started to find it pretty enjoyable, and I decided that I wasn't going to go to university. I wasn't going to do anything else. I just was going to go work on an oil rig. And I finished high school, and I was just looking for something else to do in my spare time, and I found personal training as an option. Really enjoyed coaching my friends. I would do it while I was in high school. We'd go to the gym together, coach lots of people. I started coaching people on my teams that I played with, and then it just progressed. So I thought I might as well do it as a side gig. And when I took a personal training course that was offered here in Canada, and the person that taught my course was a guy named Dean Somerset, and he just blew my mind. Incredibly smart dude, completely different perspective on a lot of stuff that I'd never heard of. And I just asked if I could shadow him, and he let me come in on every Saturday for probably 6 to 7 months, where I'd work Monday through Friday in my job, and then I'd go on the weekend and go and shadow him for 4 to 6 hours. And then when we were done for the day, he'd let me sit there and ask him questions for half an hour, and it was amazing. I learned so much. And over the course of the time, Dean started to talk to me about what I was planning to do. Why do I come and shadow him every week if I only work a few hours in this job throughout the week, and I probably spend more time shadowing him than actually working? And he convinced me that I should go back to university, go and get a degree, and learn more about the actual job that I was super passionate about. And so I ended up doing some upgrading because I didn't have the courses necessary to get into the program. And got into a Bachelor of Physical Education, which it's an odd title because it's actually more like a Bachelor of Kinesiology. They just didn't have a Bachelor of Kinesiology where I went to. So that's the title that they gave it, and I'm in no way eligible to be a teacher. But throughout that time, I ended up taking a class on the Intro to Strength and Conditioning that was taught by a person who owned one of the biggest performance gyms in the city that I lived in. And we just hit it off right from the day one. First class, we started talking. I ended up telling him all about my experience, what I'd gone through. And then I started to jump in and assist him in teaching the class. I was whenever we were down on the gym floor, I would take a group of the students and go and show them all the movements that we were supposed to do for the day. I was just crushing it. And by the end of the semester, he offered me a job. And from that day, I just started being incredibly fortunate that I jumped ahead like light years in my experience, because everyone else that was at that facility had like a master's degree in strength conditioning, a master's degree in biomechanics. And there's me. I just finished my first year of my undergrad, and I was coaching professional athletes, Olympic sport athletes. And I was extremely fortunate that across that time, basically the next like 5 years, I got to spend hanging out with all those athletes, being around the other coaches who were extremely passionate, very knowledgeable. And over the next like 4 years, I just ramped up my hours, spending more and more time there, and progressively got to a full-time gig. And then in my last year before I left to go to the U.S., I ended up becoming the head strength conditioning coach there, where then I was just in charge of basically everyone's programs, and also in charge of the interns, in charge of the coaches, and able to help then start facilitating the continuing education process for those other coaches to improve to the best degree that we could. So yeah, that's basically how I got to the point where I was with strength and conditioning. It really worked out for me, and it did expedite my learning process, because yeah, as we were going through different material in school, I already knew it, or at least I already had seen it as a minimum. And in a lot of ways, it made me also more passionate to know like the extreme details about a lot of this stuff. So while a lot of my classmates were learning the overarching ideas, I was able to get more in depth on a lot of these things and learn to an even higher degree.
When you were talking about, working on an oil rig, what was that like? Did you have any family that did it, or background, and what got you into wanting to do that, or just doing that in general?
Yes, like you had mentioned, I guess where you're from, and this is a lot more common outside of the region that I'm from, is like you finish high school and you go to university. Whereas I'm from a little bit more rural area, and it's a lot more oil based. So then, you finish high school and you go and get a trade a lot of the times. And most individuals that I knew had been involved in the trades in some way, whether they were working as a laborer, working as a millwright, pipe fitter, welder, something along those lines. And it was a lot more common because I lived in this city called Fort Saskatchewan, and just outside of it, there's like 3 oil refineries and then a couple chemical plants that all have a lot of those types of trade skills that are on the site. And so a lot of the people that live in that city are all around that. My father was a laborer, and then he became a safety officer for those jobs, and my mom was a occupational health and safety officer on one of the plant sites. So then, yeah, it was just like, that's what I was going to do. I didn't know anybody that went to university, and my parents didn't graduate high school. It was just like, that's what you do with your life. So then it was offered that I could get basically a head start while I was in high school, and I just thought, might as well try and jump on it. I don't have to go to class. I can go and work instead. And from day one, I loved it. To this day, I still really enjoy manual labor and figuring out how to fix things and a lot of that sort of stuff. I'm not as passionate about it, but I was just up north recently. My wife's family are farmers, and I got to spend probably half the time that we're up there in the mechanical shop with one of the guys, and we would be fixing combines and tractors most of the day, and it was a blast. I just really enjoy that kind of side of things.
So whenever you were doing your internship, how did you come up with the questions? You said, sometimes would spend, an extra half hour after the day was over with that guy asking questions.
I'd keep a notebook with me throughout the entire time, and I would just jot down. Most of what I would write down was actually just what he did. He did this exercise, this kind of rep scheme, this is what he said to the client during it when he was explaining it, or doing everything so that I'd be able to keep it and reflect on it later. And then as the session went on, I would just write down additional questions at the bottom of the page. And, as he coached up, I'd want to know, why did you say this thing? Or why did you do the movements in this way? Why did you pair these ones up together? What made you do this? Because up to that point, sure, I had a base level of knowledge. I had read a few books, read a few magazines, taken my course, but watching someone actually implement it and not go by the common way that's shown in these different manuals, and trying to really understand okay, so you're pairing a glute bridge and a plank. Why did you choose to do that? Like, what was the rationale there? They're obviously like completely different muscle groups. I don't understand. I'm like relatively novice. And then hearing him explain stuff of like, okay, well, yeah, like one of the reasons is I'm working on this goal, blah, blah, blah. But then I'm also pairing them up specifically because the client doesn't have to go to a different area. They can stay right in the same location and do these movements back to back without having to, go across the gym, go and find new equipment, et cetera. And so as he started to explain stuff, then I would start to try to apply that to different situations when he would do similar things, and then ask him like, oh, is that why you did that? And then that would spur us to keep talking about, okay, if he didn't put two exercises together for that reason, why did he do that? And yeah, I'm generally a fairly curious individual anyway, so it might be to my advantage for that. But more often than not, I'd sooner ask, I guess a lot of people might say I'd ask a dumb question before I ask no question.
Yeah.
And I'm willing to maybe look a little bit stupid just so that I can have a better degree of understanding, because more often than not, I just want to know as much as possible about the information. Like, what else can I gain from this person who's standing in front of me? I remember when I was younger, I had talked to a person that was a business owner, and he was telling me about, it was a guy that like lived down the street from me, and I was going to do my apprenticeship program, and he just told me, ask as many questions as you can. And one of the biggest things that he didn't like was that he would have students come to his business and they would not ask him a lot of questions. And he would ask them, like, do you have any questions? And they'd be like, no. He's like, I know that means either one, you're not paying attention, or two, you don't care to be here. And so then from that moment on, I just like always knew that it was important for me to ask questions to demonstrate that I was paying attention, to show that I actually have a real interest in this. And I've gone on to shadow tons and tons of people. Like, even to this day, I still go and shadow people for different things. And I ask lots of questions, and I'd like to think that it helps people realize I'm genuinely trying to learn what they're showing me.
When you kind of progress through after you got out of school and you got your job, you said you progressed through that and you started doing it kind of full time. What was it like to get to work with athletes like that caliber of an athlete?
So it's an interesting one, because I've actually been in this position a few times now, and where as the head strength and conditioning coach at that facility, and then I became a physical therapist at another facility for pro athletes. And in both situations, people look at those people and they think it's like, the most impressive thing that you could do. And I don't want to downplay it. I think especially on the physical therapy side of things, there's a lot more, well, on both sides, there's a lot of stress from a standpoint of like, if they don't perform well, it's put on you in a lot of situations. But from a standpoint of actually coaching these people, they're phenomenal athletes. And so then a lot of times they're able to do stuff really well without a ton of coaching. In a lot of situations, they're able to execute a movement with, you show them it, they do it, you give them a couple cues, and they're smoking it. And more often than not, you don't have to be on the ground showing them every little detail, trying to execute it to the highest degree. They're going to crush it really fast. And I think it's a part that's like extremely overlooked with high level athletes, where the people that coach them aren't necessarily the best coaches. And at least from a standpoint of, like if you took them and you put them in with working with general population, young athletes, they might struggle in the ability to actually be able to coach them and show them movements, because, like I said, I could walk in, I could show these guys how to do a power clean, and they'd probably be able to get it within half an hour. Like, it's not going to take weeks on end. Whereas if you go and teach a young athlete how to do a power clean or general population, it could take weeks to get them to really figure it out well. And I think that's a really overlooked aspect. With those guys, it was about like making sure that they didn't push too hard, ensuring that they had an appropriate load, choosing movements that didn't interfere with their sports training, choosing ways that we could program to accommodate if they had any sort of nagging issues, which is a lot of what you do anyways with the general population and other athletes. It was just to a higher degree on a lot of that stuff so that they could make sure that they maximize their sports to the best degree possible. So I really enjoyed it, and I do think it's like a phenomenal population to work with. I just personally don't look at it as like the most impressive feat to have accomplished, whereas I think a lot of people look at it as like that's the pinnacle of strength and conditioning.
As far as the athletes go versus maybe just a general population kind of person, what kind of personality differences do you see?
Yeah, I think that is extremely individual and so dependent on like the culture of the facility that you're at, the culture of what kind of teams you're working with. Like there's definitely times where I've been with athletes that are like, yeah, I already know this. I'll just go and hit it. But more often than not, most of the athletes are extremely responsive. They want to be as good as they can be. They want to be taught. They want every detail that you'll give them. And a lot of times they're looking to you to see if you are watching. They're looking to see if you have feedback for them. They're looking to see how can I be better. And I think a lot of the general population is definitely similar to that. I think there's a bit of a shift between the athletic population and the general population where a lot of the times, like you mentioned, I don't know if I'd say it's like their job, like if that's the way that they view it, but it's like they need to do this to be the best that they can be at their job, and that this will make them as good as they can be. Whereas for a lot of the general population, it's like, this is what I do to burn off energy. This is what I do for fun. This is what I do to look more jacked, any of those kinds of things. And so there's just like a little bit of a different mental approach in the learning, in the perspective that you have on when you like walk into the gym and how you actually go through the session. I think both can be extremely motivated to work hard, but the way that they work hard and the approach that they look at it from what they get out of it is just different. And even within that, it is definitely variable between people. I have a handful of clients that I see on a weekly basis, and most of them are Gen Pop, and all of those people they're like they come see me specifically because they want the details. They want to understand, like where should I place my foot, where should I place my hand, why do I do this rotation with my shoulder while I'm doing X movement, because they want to understand the details about how their body moves and how they can be the best that they can be at this. Even though this is not a sport for them, even though does not transfer over to a sport, even it's just like they come, they do this, but they, for some reason, find learning about it really interesting. Some of them are ex-athletes where they used to be competitive in a sport, and then this is like sort of become the sport that they compete in. They're just competing with themselves. But I've got one elderly client who, like, she's never done any sports. She's never done anything. This was like the first main real athletic thing that she ever did, and she likes asking all those questions. When we first started and we were doing, she came to see me because she was having knee pain. I was recommended to her, and I remember when we were first doing a very basic act called sit to stands. It's basically like a squat, but even more regressed. You just stand up out of a chair and then sit back down to it. I was explaining to her how I want her to sit back, and she was trying to understand, like, okay, so, and I basically started to explain like what a hinge was to emphasize her backside as she initiated the squat down to the chair. And she was like trying to comprehend all of that information. I first kept it extremely superficial with her, but she kept asking. She wanted to know more of the details about it. And that's not something that I personally see a ton when you work with a lot of the general pop. Like, they want to be able to do the movement to a good enough degree, and then they want to start crushing it. Start adding on weight, start putting out more reps, do whatever, because they're looking to, get the outcomes from it, not necessarily go through the process of it.
Once you kind of did your strength conditioning for a while, you said you got into the physical therapy side of it. What led into that?
Yeah, I was actually working as a strength and conditioning coach, and I'd have athletes that would experience an injury, and then we would have staff that we worked with. We had an athletic therapist that was on staff that I could send them over to, and then we also had physios that we could refer out to, and we had chiros and physicians, everything that you'd need. And the challenge that I experienced is that I really wanted to be able to know why they were doing what they were doing and how I could help in a better way, and essentially like kind of manage everything. Back at the time, there was a strength and conditioning coach and physical therapist that was highly regarded as like the best person in general for all of these things. His name was Charlie Weingroff, and he'd been a strength coach and a physical therapist in the NBA. and now he was like a continuing education specialist, and everyone referred to him as like the top dog. And he had a doctor of physical therapy, and he had been a well-versed strength coach, and I like viewed him as like the person to aspire to, essentially. So while I was a strength coach, I started going shadow physios and chiros to try and gain a better understanding of like where do I fit in this picture as being like not going out of my scope of practice, but also trying to do a better service, whether it mean like reduce the injuries from happening or to help rehab them at the gym. And I just saw everything that they were doing and became so interested in it. And then I talked to some other people that were in the field that were ones that I looked up to, like Charlie, and asked them for advice. And they all said, that's what you think, and you should go and become a physio. And so then I started to look into my options. I initially thought that I wanted to be in the professional sports setting. And so then I talked to people that were in that, and they said, you'd be best off if you went and got a doctorate. So then I looked into going to school in the States and went down and got my doctorate at a school in the Boston area. And yeah, went through the process and then spent years just continuing on. Like while I was in school, I'd go and spend my spare time shadowing strength and conditioning coaches that were wherever I lived, or go and see physios, and kept doing that process. And then ended up having some incredible internship opportunities and while I was in school. And then once I was done, just continued on doing my thing.
Pretty cool to get to go through that kind of situation twice. Did you find yourself becoming almost a better student at that point?
Yeah, so I will say that the whole time that I've gone to school, not when I was in high school, honestly, when I was in high school, I was a pretty bad student. I had okay grades, but I was really not any interest in it at all. Like I was just there to show up. Whereas when I decided that I had like an interest in these things, I really shifted gears and became a completely different person. Like it was a huge change in my character, changed the way that I approached a lot of things. And so yeah, when I first went to university for my undergrad, that was a big change. And then when I went to go get my doctorate, I heavily shifted gears even further into it, where I became basically all in, nothing but school and learning about this stuff. There was essentially nothing else in my life for a good like 3 or 4 years. So all I wanted to do was just know as much as I could about the entire area of rehab and performance and the intertwine between them. And, whether it was the information I was reading in school, the additional information I could get from mentorships, the additional information I could get from, self-reading, taking additional continuing education. I was a voracious learner, and it really didn't start until I was in my mid-20s.
Sounds like you were pretty busy during those 3 or 4 years you said. Were you still doing strength conditioning at all, just like obviously on the, to bring in the money, or were you strictly focused on the school and doing something kind of else on the side? What was that kind of situation like?
Yeah, no, I was, it was to a much lesser degree, but I was still offering strength conditioning. So number one, I was coaching people that I had back. So again, I moved from Canada to the U.S. to get my degree. And during that time, I kept coaching a lot of the athletes that I had back in Canada. So particularly people that weren't at the facility that I had left. So I had a lot of people that I had coached and trained on the side that were, powerlifters, weightlifters, people that are in the community for the sports that I was competing in. For anyone that doesn't know, like while I was coaching these professional athletes, I was still started competing in powerlifting, strongman, weightlifting, Highland Games, MMA. And so then I ended up picking up people to coach through those sports. And when I moved to the U.S., I kept coaching a lot of those people through distance coaching. So that was where I really got my first like major online coaching presence. And then at the same time, I found a gym to work out at, and they offered me the opportunity to bring any clients there that I wanted and just pay them like a small cut of it. And so then I would coach a few people on the weekends. I started coaching some of my classmates, just like honestly extremely random stuff. And yeah, it was busy, but if you ever ask my wife, I'm never not busy. You're
doing kind of a bunch of sports there. You obviously powerlifting and strongman are kind of weight based, they're workout based. It's a lot about, about that end of it. But the kind of one that sticks out to me is the MMA. How did you go from from those two and into the MMA side of things?
So I actually kind of like did it the opposite way. Yeah, I was in high school and the UFC was starting to become really popular, and I ended up again. I was not a great person in high school, and I ended up doing a lot of essentially like underground street fighting, and it was not great. We'd just like have a spot designated. Lots of people would show up, be a giant circle, and then get into getting like designated fights, and not a great scene. And yeah, I finished high school, and during that time, I was playing rugby, football, basketball, and those things all basically fizzled out and ended for me. And then I was looking for something to keep doing, and there was an actual MMA gym in my town, but I could never afford it while I was in high school. And now that I was working and making money, I decided that I would go and take it on more seriously. So then I started doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Muay Thai, and ended up picking up some judo and some boxing as well. And then doing a brief stint of wrestling when I went to university, and just like dove into that in my spare time. You know, I'd usually go to school or work Monday through Friday from like 6 till 7-ish p.m. And then there was 7 to 9 p.m. classes I could go and take, and I'd go do that, go to bed, start over every day, and squeak in whenever some training here and there whenever I could, and did that for a few years. And then I ended up taking on a few very bad concussions when I was in university, to my third year of university, and I just like really interfered with school. It was extremely bad. I wasn't able to go into 10 classes for a while, and I just decided that I didn't care that badly for them, and I was also spending a fair bit of money considering that I was like a full-time student, and didn't want to spend a ton of money that I was really not able to fully take advantage of what I was paying for, and didn't want to take on another concussion. And at the time, my main concern was I didn't want to have to miss more school. Now I look back, I'm glad I didn't take on more concussions because they could have definitely led to more issues. But I ended up, at the time, I'd been working out, coaching people, strength and conditioning, and then I was starting to get involved with strongman just because at the place where I did my side coaching, which was in the town that I lived in Fort Saskatchewan, was where the Alberta Strongman Association is. And so for anyone in the States, Alberta is like the equivalent of a state. And so the Strongman Association was based out of there. I talked to the strongmen that were there, and they'd occasionally show me stuff. And then after I left MMA, they really started to poke at me way more because I was at the gym a ton. So then I decided I'd just jump into a strongman meet one weekend, and really, really enjoyed it. Started to train much more seriously for it. Started to get involved in powerlifting, and then started to get involved in weightlifting, and just eventually left MMA from that. I actually plan to get back into MMA this coming next year. I was going to start up sometime this summer, but then because of COVID conditions, I decided not to. So once things settle down, I'll be picking up some MMA again.
What's one of, you would say, your biggest advantages when somebody comes to you?
One of the big things I can express to people is that I really have a good, comprehensive understanding of where to meet someone, where they're currently at, basically across the board. So if you're coming in and you want to crush some weights, you want to get jacked, you want to be in the best fitness of your life, etc., but you got some sort of injury, or you've got a history of injuries, or you've got something like, if you're over the age of 18, there's a good chance you've had something happen. You might have a little bit of concern about it. You want it taken care of in some way. Well, I can probably do that for you. And in the complete other end of the spectrum, if you're someone that's had tons of injuries, currently injured, got some limitations that really restrict you from being able to go and get jacked, go and improve your fitness in whatever way you want to be able to, well, I'm probably the guy that knows how to figure out the solutions to be able to, one, manage your injuries, make them better in whatever way we can, and also figure out strategies to get you jacked, get you fit in whatever way we can while not pissing those things off. Yeah, a lot of the times, most of the people that I see, I'm a pretty big proponent that I'm not looking to just like isolate or work on one spot. That's like a big thing where I have a lot of people that come come inquire with me about coaching services, and it's got to be like a really rare instance where I don't manage everything in regards to your training. Like I want to handle everything in regards to strength, power, endurance, whatever I can. It's not your sport, and including your rehab coaching wherever possible. I want like the entire spectrum of things. I want to be able to manage it in as much possible way as I can. And for me, that I think that it gives me the most ability to have a good understanding of what else is happening in this person's life and be able to regulate all the different loads that are being inputted. And for the person, I think it gives them a lot of confidence that there's not going to be missing spots between where one coach is telling them to do one thing, another coach is telling them to do different things, and there's interference in any way. And so I think that it's a bit of a different situation than what most people are used to, where they might have like a rehab professional for their ankle, but then they have a sport coach who's telling them to do lots of other stuff, and or a strength conditioning coach telling them different things, and they conflict at times. And so they don't need to have multiple people. I can just like essentially take care of everything for them from those standpoints. And I'm also more than willing to go and reach out to sports coaches, talk to them. It's not an uncommon occurrence where I will go and either meet a sport coach if they live here in where I live, or if I have to jump on a phone call, Zoom call, something with them, and I go and discuss like about what the athlete's going through, what the expectations are from the coach for what they're going to have to do, where we can meet somewhere in the middle, given if they have any sort of constraints, if I can give any recommendations on some sort of modifications for the athlete's tasks that they're going to have to do for the coming future. And yeah, like I want to be as involved as I possibly can to help facilitate the best process for my respective client. And when I explain that to people, they're pretty stoked usually.
Where do you see, if anything, with strength conditioning? What kind of problems maybe do you see in the field right now as far as like what people are doing, what people are teaching, or just simply telling their athletes, hey, this is good to do or okay to do? What do you see of that is negative, that is drawing people into you for the physical therapy side of things?
Yeah, there's a few things I could say. I think like a bit of a problem, and it really comes down to what kind of environment you're in or the network of people that you have from a strength and conditioning standpoint, because these aren't all going to be across the board, and they're not going to, maybe even involve anybody. But some of these things are definitely issues that different professionals I've seen have, and a big one is like a big emphasis on what they perceive as like sports training. So really focusing on trying to essentially replicate the sport in the gym, whereas like a strength and conditioning coach's job is not to try to do the task of whatever they do out on the field or in the court or wherever. The job is to improve the individual's capacity to be able to then go and apply their improved physical abilities and on the court in a different way. And so instead of focusing on developing some sort of specific actual improvements in capacity, they really start to just do these like weird drills and exercises that they think are going to be transferring over to their, kick or sprint or pitch or whatever they're going to try to do. And we just don't consistently see that actually transfer very well from the standpoint of the qualitative research that we have on this. And so I think that they'd be much better off really focusing on that stuff. And then even on the same trend where a lot of coaches focus on those kinds of things and they miss out on developing the capacity in these different muscular tissues and different kinds of tissues, ligaments, tendons, etc., to really be able to handle and be more robust and resilient against injuries. For instance, like a lot of coaches don't do leg curl variations because, when you see an athlete ever do leg curl in a sport, it's not a thing. But when we're looking at the ability to reduce the likelihood of a hamstring tear, like doing some kind of leg curl action is going to be one of our best options that we can, because number one, it will train the hamstring in an extremely focused manner. And then two, it actually does replicate a task that the hamstring has from a standpoint of sprinting. It just doesn't look quite the same. And so a lot of coaches maybe don't have quite the deepest understanding of these kinds of things, and it can leave an athlete in a position where, number one, they're not maybe getting the best performance benefits they can, but also two, they're not maybe getting the best injury reduction benefit that they could. So I think that those are like relatively major ones. And then another one is like a strength conditioning coach or performance specialist, whatever, trying to become more than they can. So like I mentioned earlier, where I was trying to shadow physios and chiros and stuff and figure out where I fit in the picture while staying in my scope of practice. And I think that's like an important detail. Like I wanted to be able to figure out, how could I reduce injuries in the way that I was coaching, in the way that I was programming, etc. But I wasn't trying to become the physio or become the chiro. And it's not quite as problem in like high school or college settings, but it is more common in like the private sector and more common in the pro sector, where you see strength and conditioning coaches doing rehab stuff, doing manual therapy, doing cupping, doing whatever, like stuff that is so far away from what they're legally even supposed to be doing or stuff that they're trained on. And they're just, like we discussed briefly, like trying to provide more of a service for your client, which I think is great when it stays within what you're actually trained and knowledgeable to do. But when you're trying to go past what you have the ability to do, then it's just like not appropriate. Same with like a strength and conditioning coach. Like, yeah, you can definitely give nutritional advice to like a healthy individual, trying to guide them on making better choices, etc. But if that person has like an eating disorder or has like, some sort of specific issue that needs to be managed by a registered dietitian, like you should not be the one telling them what they should be doing. That should be a referral and let that person manage that. You can be there to support them in whatever way you can, but like that's not your scope of practice, and that is incredibly inappropriate for you to do. And I don't see it a ton from like a lot of coaches, but it is a thing that I'm regularly sent these kinds of messages and pictures of coaches and coaches massaging their athletes on the gym floor, doing different sort of stuff. Like people just love to send me this stuff on Instagram, and I just think that people are missing the ballpark on where they can provide the best service. Like a lot of the stuff that we've discussed is about how can you provide the best service for your athlete, and that's really doing what you are good at and what you're trained at. And if you're not trained at those things, then refer them to someone that is a specialist at that, so that they can have, again, the best service possible, because that's the best outcome for that athlete. So I think those are probably the big ones I would say.
Maybe some of that comes from a point of a strength conditioning coach doesn't want to look like they don't have the answer to something sometimes.
Definitely.
Really cool. And I really appreciate, you coming on today.
Thank you for having me. Really appreciate it. And hopefully everyone enjoyed the episode.
If you just want to let people know where they can find you and kind of what you offer, that would be cool.
Yeah, you can best find me on Instagram at dr.samspinelli. It's an easy option. Got lots of content on Instagram, on YouTube, across also companies E3 Rehab and Citizen Athletics. Both have videos, programs, lots of stuff is available. Check it out. Got questions? You can shoot me a message. I'm pretty good about getting back to most people. Might take me a little while, but I try my best.
That is the podcast. And until next time, this is Daniel from The Weight Room, and I'm out.